Hello and welcome to another edition of the Knicks Film School Pregame Show. My name is Andrew Claudio, a.k.a. GMAC, and it's time to preview another Knicks matchup, this time in the second round of the NBA playoffs, because the Knicks defeated the Philadelphia 76ers in the first round 4-2. I'm just going to bask in that for a second as a lifelong hater of the city of Philadelphia. It's good that the New York Knicks were able to get one up and continue the consistency of losing that the Philadelphia 76ers have had. I've said all my shout outs on Twitter. Shout out to the Right Syracuse Sanchez crew, both Mike and Spike, and of course Daniel Olinger, even RB Philly Take. I give them a shout out. Philly can hold this L, but hardworking people that are good at what they do and are passionate about their team are good for this space. And I appreciate it, despite the recklessness that I cannot be held responsible for in the 24 hours after a Knicks game. I do have great respect for the content creators that we collaborated with, which is why you're in for a treat, Knicks fans. The Knicks, of course, are about to head on to the second round to play the Indiana Pacers, part 8 of this rivalry. There's one matchup from 2013 that, as a Melo stan, hurt me greatly. Then there's 6 matchups in the 90s that these two teams split 3-3. Only one of those matchups in the first round in 1993. And 3 of these matchups were in the conference finals. The Knicks won 2. Their 94 trip to the finals, the 99 trip to the finals went through the Pacers. The Pacers' only trip, obviously, to the NBA finals was at the hands of the Knicks in 2000 in Patrick Ewing's last series as a New York Knick. The 95 series, of course, features 2 of the most heartbreaking losses in Knicks history, both Game 1 and Game 7 of that series. In fact, to help my wife understand why this rivalry means so much, we sat down this afternoon and watched the Reggie Miller 30 for 30 between the Knicks and the Pacers. So she now knows what 8 points in 8.9 seconds and finger roll mean and why those words are so triggering. She also understands why anytime we're watching on TNT, a loud F Reggie Miller comes out of her husband. So we're ready here in the Claudio household for this series. And I think you're all going to enjoy our preview here on the Pregame Pod from the Pacers side of things. Caitlin Cooper, the number one most requested person when it comes to Pacers content whenever we have a matchup against the Pacers. As you remember, back in February, we collaborated with her and I set her and Benjy up to talk about an upcoming series and just basketball in general. Well, I wanted to set that up again and I reached out to her. Here's a little behind the scenes. I reached out to her on the train ride home from Grand Central after our watch party at T Squared on Thursday for Game 6. Little did I know she had already reached out to Benjy to collaborate and go on her YouTube channel. And then by the time I got privy to that, I then changed my tune and said, hey, you want to just make this a crossover and we could feature some of it on our feed. And she said, you know, we're good. You could just double post it. And I said I would make sure that I'd send as many people as possible over to her YouTube channel. Well, going to make good on that promise. The link to the Caitlin Cooper YouTube channel is in the description of this episode. You need to go check it out because it's where you're going to learn everything you need to learn throughout this series from the Pacers perspective. She's great. I mean, we've been, if you're not new to Knicks Film School, you've heard her on our channel before, but I really think you're going to enjoy the stuff that she does, as well as her co-host, Sam Folk, who used to cover the Raptors or still covers the Raptors for Raptors Republic. But there's 2 former Raptors in this series. So, 3 if you include Precious Achiuwa, but we'll see how much he plays in this series. Look, you're about to hear an outstanding conversation. I'm not going to belabor it anymore. I'm just going to say, please go subscribe to the Caitlin Cooper YouTube channel. If you're feeling even more generous, subscribe to her Patreon called Basketball She Wrote. And without further ado, please enjoy this conversation between Caitlin Cooper, Sam Folk, and our very own Benjy Ritholtz, previewing this matchup between the New York Knicks and the Indiana Pacers. Enjoy.
The Pacers get a 120-98 win over the Milwaukee Bucks to do something they haven't done in over a decade. Win a playoff series. And something else they haven't done in more than a decade. Play the New York Knicks in a playoff series. The last time that happened, 11 years ago, the Pacers advanced. The Knicks did not, but that's okay because today I have 2 of my favorite people. Benjy Ritholtz from Knicks Film School, somebody who I really enjoy collaborating with, really respect his work. The last time we did one of these, we've had several fans, I don't know if you've known this, being like, now that this is a series, we need this collaboration again. And here we are. Also, Samson Folk, both of these teams made midseason trades for Raptors wings. Samson covers the Raptors better than anybody I know and also has been collaborating with me covering the Pacers for over a week now. He's stuck with me for another week. I got asked in a mailbag about a week ago, what is your favorite podcast that you've ever recorded? And at the time, I told the person, I don't know if I've recorded it yet. Maybe today is that day. Here we are. So first questions first. Benjy, did you watch Obi Toppin and the majestic experience that was Game 5 last night? And what were your thoughts?
Damn right I did. Damn right. I also needed the distraction prior to an extremely late Knicks tip-off with all the anxiety that came with that. So it was nice. Got to watch some Obi highlights. Basically the realization of the Obi dream happened in front of my eyes. It was truly inspiring stuff. So yes, I was privy to the Obi Renaissance.
In one game, we saw Obi Toppin play at the 5 and defend Brook Lopez and Bobby Portis. In one possession, he defended above the level of the screen against Dame twice, switched on to Pat Connaughton and got a block. He rolled to the basket and made a push shot floater in the lane. And he made an off the dribble pass with his left hand past Chris Middleton's ear. Like, I really feel like that might even exceed like the best Knick fan optimism.
Yeah, it was incredible. Now, the funny thing about it is, I tweeted this out last night, but like Tibbs basically stored Obi in the corner for 3 years. That was the plan, the developmental plan for whatever reason. I mean, there are reasons for it, but it is kind of how it ended up. And so I think you do reap some of those benefits because he's become a really good corner 3 shooter, and you saw a little bit of that. The stuff that you never saw with the Knicks, and that was fun to watch, was he screens and rolls and then seals a guy and gets an offensive rebound. Never. I don't think I saw that once in 3 years. Or the play that you're referring to in the third quarter where he gets a little push shot on a screen and roll. Like the stuff that kind of rounds out his game. Because if he's just shooting corner threes and he's just in transition, you could take that guy out of the game. But if he's actually involved in actions, you unlock his passing ability a little bit. That's what we always thought Obi could be. I know he hasn't been that all year, but I think he's shown more of it consistently with the Pacers, with the fit being what it is. It was great to watch.
The funny thing is like, I know over the summer, given what Obi's role was, not very many paint touches, screening less than ever, taking more threes than ever. It really did feel like, DiVincenzo can do those things better than Obi. So it made sense for the Knicks to go forward and do that. In all reality, Obi's still not screening that much. Still taking a lot of threes. I think he's still only finished like 10 total field goal attempts as the roll man this year, but gets that one rather than having to roll in tandem with Mitchell Robinson out of a double drag. But I did a podcast earlier this year with Dan Devine, and he told me during it, he said, it's like Obi got sent to a farm upstate in New York, only there really is a farm, and now he just gets to run free. So, Samson, did you have any thoughts about the Obi Toppin experience?
I've been enjoying it a bunch as someone who's seen him sparingly, I guess, watching him in this concentrated fashion, realizing that he truly is the bellwether for hot girl basketball, and the farm upstate growing, a firm part of the agrarian economy with buckets, certainly. He's great, man. That lefty pass coming up court, live dribble lefty, swung it under the rim. I was like, what the hell? It kind of blew my mind because I hadn't seen anything like that. When he went up and grabbed that no-look oop that Tyrese threw, and he's like catching it way out of sorts, finger rolling it just over the lip of the rim. I was like, man, he's really on one. And he may be like, too much dip on the chip. He started putting up a lot of threes towards the end. Like he was really feeling it.
And he starts doing the thing. He starts doing the thing in the corner where his hands are up for 3/4 of a possession, waiting for it. Yeah. Like he's just freaking ready to chuck.
He wants it bad. I think he achieved flow state, and good for him because I think we all dream of getting there at some point in time.
And talk about a flow state too, when he clearly rolled his ankle, like at the 10-minute mark of the third quarter. He's basically on one leg, and he's still outrunning the Milwaukee Bucks in transition. So, and he stayed on the floor for the remainder of that quarter. I'm like, oh, they're not going to take him off until his shift's off because that ankle is going to swell because he had rolled it pretty obviously. But I don't think Obi Toppin will most likely be the star of this particular series, though I expect that he might still be a significant contributor given what the Pacers' depth are. But the two main stars of this series, I think, Jalen Brunson and Tyrese Haliburton. A stat that I've monitored and really been interested in all year is no two guards in the NBA, according to Second Spectrum, reject screens more frequently than Jalen and Tyrese. But I feel like they do this in a very different way. So Benjy, from your experience of watching Jalen Brunson, why is he so good at rejecting screens? And just to be honest here, he is number one at rejecting screens. Tyrese is number two.
There you go. Yeah. I mean, he had one last night on Maxey that he made his first three coming back into the game. He had made two straight to push it to 6, where I think, and this was before a dribble, so he rejected it just out of basically triple threat. He's like able to make more movements within a second than I think anybody else in the league. Like, there's so many just like fast twitch muscles in his body that people don't have. I don't know how to explain it, but he's able to sell the fact that he's going into the screen and yet within a split second then reverse course, and before the guy can react, he's going the other way. You can watch the one he did to Maxey last night. I think the threat of his pull-up game, both from 3 and mid-range, you really want to stay on his hip. Every coach's focus is, if you're going over the screen, is stay on his hip. So like the threat of that, and you never want to detach. So all those sudden movements and that reverse of direction, I think, is even more powerful. And then he just freaking loves to do it too. Like, sometimes I think he's over addicted to it. It's like, man, like we can get into something here, get them into rotation a little bit if we use the screen, but he really doesn't like to all that much. Some combination of all those things. He even does it off like when the first screen's there and on his like escape dribble. Like, as he's backtracking, like most guys, okay, now we're going back into the next movement. He's reversing course within the escape dribble, like all in one motion. It's just extraordinary that he's able to do that. And I think that's what keeps guys so off balance all the time, is his ability to move so quickly in short bursts.
When I think about Jalen, I kind of think of the stutter rip, and that his whole game is a stutter rip. That it is like, the stutter rip is tough for defenders because it's that jitter. But it's that jitter that it kind of messes up what you've seen before with that step through, that jab. And working from there and getting downhill, as Benjy said, putting people on the hip, that comfort playing off of 2 is really what weaponizes everything. And so many guards have a really tough time occupying those spaces on the floor and still being like, I'm comfortable here, I'll make a shot from here. And so a reject is saying, in my mind, because the reject rarely gives you a wide open lane, it just gives you an avenue downhill, and a crowded one. Tyrese, because he's such a great passer, takes that reject to get middle, to start working from there, to get to an end goal. Whereas Jalen doesn't know what the end goal yet is. He just knows that, like, it could be a shot and I'll be comfortable taking that one. I talked to Tom Thibodeau when he was in Toronto about this, kind of saying, like, is this innate? Do you find that this is something you can teach? And also talked to Eric Spoelstra about it. And those guys came away saying, like, a guard who's that comfortable in the middle of the floor, you just got to be like fundamentals, cozy with the competition, and you got to work on it from like a very young age. Because Eric's talked about it more. Like, it's really hard to teach something like that. And Tom just kind of got to like wax poetic about his guy and be like, that's a special kid right there, you know?
I've known him since he was 4. Yeah, that whole
he's so impressive getting middle. It blows my mind every time.
To a certain extent, the way that both of them set this up also is almost the character of both teams, right? Because I feel a lot of times with Brunson, it's more so happening when the defender's taking a step toward the screen or the defender's adjusting a stance. And then it's like what Samson says, where maybe he is driving through a crowd and he's going to figure his way out of how to get out of that crowd. Whereas with Tyrese, a lot of times it's because he's applying so much pressure in transition that the guard is having to backpedal, they're flat-footed, and it is really hard to absorb the ball in transition and then also direct and connect it without giving up that emergency rotation. I think in the game in December when Tyrese had the 2020 game, obviously against the zombie Knicks after they had traded for OG, very depleted rosters, Evan Fournier's out there running around, other ghosts of Knicks past are out there playing in that game. But like, you can see Tyrese do that in semi-transition, like they're calling for a wide action. And sometimes this is something else. Tyrese likes the gamesmanship of it. He'll call a play very demonstratively right in front of his defender, and then he'll get DiVincenzo like, oh, they're running wide. I'm going to look and turn my head, and I'm going to look to see if Buddy's coming off that screen. The second he looks to see if Buddy's coming, Tyrese is gone, and they're getting a corner 3 out of it. So it's really kind of stylistically a difference in how both of them approach the pick and roll and how both of the teams approach what styles they play in. But I just wanted to get both of your thoughts on that, because that is something that the two teams are so different. The two stars are so different, but in terms of an actual skill, that's something that they both kind of look for as their first thing when they're operating out of the pick and roll. But let's turn attention just to Jalen Brunson. Benji, I don't know if you're going to remember this clip that I'm going to throw up here on the stage. But this is actually a tweet, and this is how complicated what Jalen did is, because the whole tweet can't even fit on the screen right now. But this was one possession against the Pacers in the third quarter. He evades a three-quarter court trap. Aaron Nesmith's attached to him like an itchy sweater, takes away the get action. He circles back. He's going to go into like gut Chicago to try to get the ball. That gets denied too. Now he's going to come through a comeback, and Aaron Nesmith squares him up. Now Tyrese is at the nail because he wants to take away his left hand. And look how much separation Jalen gets going to the right to get to the rim. And I remember when we did that podcast, I told you, I said, it's like he uses his entire team as a jungle gym to get to his shot. So when you're dealing with something that's that degree of a load, a 1-on-5 possession, and that's not even bad defense. The initial trap probably could have been better, but that is not bad defense. How do you guard this guy?
Can I say something quickly?
Yeah.
Please
you know how we said that sometimes the Pacers can get stuck in that spot where it's like a system creates looks, not a player? The Knicks are like the inverse, right? It's like a player creates everything. A system is nothing to a player. What's a king to a god? All that kind of stuff. I watched the team that used to be quite similar to that, the Raptors. It is very fun to watch the Knicks, like Raptors, Knicks, ISO ball, live on, and especially not watching it via like the 6'9" Raptors, but Jalen Brunson, like a guy who is so obviously insane at pursuing his own shot and taking any possible shot on the floor. So yeah, players create shots. I love that.
That's great. What I will say, like what's changed, I think, especially post Randall injury, second half of the year, the player creates all the shots, but when you watched even in that possession, like the jungle gym needs to be there, right? Like everybody is aware as that action is going on that Jalen's been denied here. He's been denied here. How do we still get him open on the third action? So Precious Achiuwa has screened 3 different times in 3 different ways within that action just to get that sliver of space. And that's all that Jalen Brunson needs to create everything else. But like last year's Knicks, who are obviously also relying on Randall, first half of this year, there was not that like court awareness about that team at all. And it was like, if the first action shut down, then it's really truly just like an ISO. It's going to get Jalen Brunson the ball or Julius Randle the ball and let them work one-on-one and hope that help comes and we create something off of that. I think what we've seen, and we saw it a bunch against the Sixers in the first round this year, is the whole team is so invested in getting him that space. It's kind of crazy. The load is insane. What they're asking Brunson to do seems impossible, but yet he keeps doing it. It's just become this crazy chemistry that exists on the floor now, even though it's so heliocentric, right? Even though it's all Brunson, but everybody is working together to get him into those spaces.
Very glad you highlighted the cerebral aspect of Precious Achiuwa's game.
I knew you would like that.
Doesn't get enough love. Yeah. Our favorite shooting guard.
That's him.
Yeah.
Everyone has ducked the question. How do you guard Jalen Brunson?
Oh, that's my bad. I don't know because the Sixers did an amazing job in the first 2 games. You need on the ball, you need length, you need intelligence and discipline. Like you need all those things. And Kelly Oubre throughout the season was that guy. I think better than anyone else in the league, believe it or not. And I think as this series wore on and you saw it down the stretch of game, it sucks because Brunson, he does the thing where he stops and you rear end him. We did it twice in the fourth quarter last night. The discipline aspect is so tough. To ask someone to stay on his hip but avoid fouling is almost it's a contradiction. Like there's no way to really do it. I think Miami, people treat it differently. The Knicks have kind of figured out the trapping thing. We'll touch on whether the Pacers try to do that, but like with Hartenstein in there, maybe you do it more with Mitch when Mitch is in the game because of his struggles playing in that short role. But with Hartenstein and Josh Hart screening, those guys have kind of figured out the downhill 4-on-3 aspect. And you have really good shooters now with DiVincenzo and McBride and OG in the corners. I don't know if trapping is really the answer. It's probably a mix of everything, like you say, against any great player. It's got to be, but it has to start. It has to start on the ball with. I think length is really important because if you're small, he's going to bully you. Even if you're freaking Drew Holiday or Derek White, he's going to bully you. You have to have real length and you have to have that discipline.
I think the best Brunson defender is on his team. Like, I think in a lab, OG Anunoby, you'd be like, this is a guy who contain crowd, strong enough to like not get thrown off by all the bumps, stay disciplined. I also thought it was interesting, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, that he had to play with a little bit more pace in the middle of the floor with Embiid's presence there, and to watch Brunson take that new challenge in stride throughout the series and kind of like game it, figure it out. Really big development, because I think, Knicks fans and everybody was seeing like what the commentary was around Brunson after the first couple games. Like, it's saying like, okay, he's getting stuck in places, like there's not a lot of creation, but just what great players do is they just figure it out. Like, I need more pace coming through this action. I need to be a little bit more decisive going downhill. It's not as much like pick up and wiggle. It's a little bit like extended dribble. But I think it's, as you said, you want to throw quite a few different things at them. And this is where coaching comes into it. You need a coach who's pulling the right trigger at the right time to keep a star off kilter.
Most likely the primary defender is going to be Andrew Nembhard. And Samson knows, we've talked privately off air, that I've told him that I think Andrew Nembhard's pretty talented as a point of attack defender. I think he has a lot of talent with his feel as an off-ball defender as well. Nobody's given him more trouble this year defending them than Jalen Brunson. So would you allow me to go on a trip down memory lane of the ways in which the Pacers have tried to guard Jalen Brunson?
I can't wait. Let's go.
We've talked about a lot of these, Benjy, so I'm sure you're going to remember. So this is actually a year ago, and you'll likely remember that I told you and said that I think the quickest and easiest scouting report for a player is to watch them play against their old team. And Jalen Brunson did not play for the Indiana Pacers, but Jalen Brunson did play for Rick Carlisle and Jenny Busick and Mike Weinar in Dallas. So in this start of this game, they were very aggressive, funneling him into the corners, which made sense on the right side of the floor. And this was like the first time where I was like, he's taking a star turn, because you could see how much he was creating with his right hand, even against these traps, when he was funneled to get to his mid-range shot and get into those soft spots of the defense. It was a little strange for me that they were also doing it on the left side of the floor and really icing him and pushing him to the sidelines. And as you know, he's still going to be able to wiggle and worm his way to the basket even against that. In the first quarter...
He's such an ass, man. It's so crazy, that move.
Yeah. In the first quarter, he ended up going 6 of 7 against this coverage, had 15 points. The Pacers by halftime, this was a very wild, weird game. It was the one where Tyrese ended up getting hurt. They played a lot of strange lineups in it. They were just like, we have to blitz everything. So they end up playing Isaiah Jackson and just really trapping Jalen Brunson, which to an extent, he doesn't have a lot of size for position as a guard. And given who the Knicks were a year ago, a lot of that was just like adjacent passes to Julius Randle. And then sometimes they would go send traps at Randle as well. This created a lot of chaos and confusion. Eventually, I remember that Tibbs ended up not playing Mitchell Robinson anymore. They leaned towards Hartenstein until eventually he actually did something he never wants to do, which is play Julius Randle at the 5. And that's how they had to close out that game. So the Pacers now ice screens the fewest of any team in the NBA. They send most things middle, and you're going to see that Tyrese is going to do a lot more show coverage, although they just still let them turn the ball. Like you said, they've gotten better at having those guards screen and play downhill and be able to get the ball to the other side of the floor. And that's important because, if Tyrese is getting called into action, I think that they could be a lot more aggressive pre-switching him into these. Like if Pascal is going to hop up there and then Tyrese can hop over to the other side of the floor. They weren't doing enough of that, in my opinion, but they're just giving Brunson access to the baseline with Tyrese in those types of situations. And then also like Obi was getting hunted a lot, and he actually told Pascal, like, hey, go. This is the one time where they pre-switched Pascal into Brunson, and you could really see him changing his top foot and at least got him to pass the ball. So that was a little bit of a small win in a game when Brunson went off for 40 plus points. But
that's where you want Brunson. In that last clip, I think his isolation numbers this year are not good. I know you think it would be, but they have been very poor. I think in the first round they were poor. If you have him dribbling through his legs a few times on a big, now it can't be like a slow-footed big at the 3-point line. But if it's someone who can move their feet a little bit, you're gonna force him most likely, if you stay down on the pump fake, into a contested fadeaway mid-range shot. Like that's where that possession is going to go, or he passes. If the Pacers can get him into that scenario enough, I think that's probably a win. Sorry, I interrupted you though.
Yeah, I mean, then that's where they need to be more active in spots where Pascal, needs to be the person that's pre-switching on some of those approaches, because as you'll remember in that game, it ended up being where Buddy Hield got left on a couple islands, even though they had gone switch to blitz on like pretty much every other possession. But it was Buddy. Let's have him try to hold down the fort here. But this is a possession that I actually want to get your insights on. So Brunson doing a bully drive there on the right side of the floor. You can see that Andrews flooded over. He's going to perhaps double from the bottom. Pascal has the option to double from the top. When you watch Brunson play against other opponents, where is the best spot on the floor to double him from if you're going to double in these types of situations? Because that is Buddy Hield. Not that Buddy's on the roster anymore, but you see my point.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the more you can force this to the corner, I mean, to their point, I mean, in the first coverage we discussed, right? Like he's making those mid-range jumpers, and they maybe were a little soft in terms of once they got him to the corner of keeping him there and maybe even showing that second body. This is also interesting because you have Precious Achiuwa one pass away, playing the 4 next to Hartenstein, which I don't think you'll see, although maybe, in terms of that allows Pascal to be very aggressive at the nail. I think if you got to funnel this as much as you can to the corner, and because as you say, like the limitation is he's very small. And if you can take away his sight lines, he's very rarely going to throw a cross-court pass. Very rarely. So the Knicks always have an outlet for him out of traps. If it's at top of the floor, that's an easy one, obviously, because you can just be on the other wing. If you're a corner like this and you can trap him and keep him really, really tied to that sideline, I think you have a chance to force some bad passes and turnovers.
Samson, do you have any thoughts on what you think about that? Like, let's take away that it's Precious Achiuwa making the post-entry pass. Let's pretend it's DiVincenzo or somebody with a little bit more shooting credibility there.
I think so. As Benji said, I don't think you'll see this alignment necessarily.
Sure.
But as you pointed out, the corner forces like a great deal of shot making from Brunson. And as Ben also pointed out, like if you're waiting on him to make like these incredible passes with the lack of sightlines that he has, that's probably the best place to funnel him. And this is a very similar spot to like we all kind of giggled and laughed at the step through end one that he made. But that's not necessarily replicable every single time down the court. This is mostly fine, I think, even if Precious is Dante instead.
The thing that I think about it is it's contrary to what the Pacers have done all year because they almost exclusively double from the top. So you would see Pascal smashing down there, and then they keep all those rotations in front. From my eye, when I've watched Brunson against the Pacers, if he gets baseline, it's pretty much over for you, especially if he has his left hand. So like Nembhard ends up running away from this and for whatever reasons cleanses and then gets out. And then Brunson ends up turning on Buddy and being able to get to the rim because nobody actually ever commits on either side of it. But like if you watch it here in the game against December when Andrew's in that same type of a spot, like again, so good at playing off of 2 feet and he does get in front of it, but Andrew can slide and then you're forcing that pass over to the corner. For the Pacers to do that, that's very outside of character for you to see them showing that coverage against somebody in that type of a situation. So could they be a little bit mistake riddled with some of their rotations out of it? Perhaps, but I feel like that's probably the better spot based on what I've seen because of how often they were allowing him to get baseline in the games in February.
Before you get to that, I would also say like some of it and Josh Hart becoming a flamethrower notwithstanding in the first round is Josh Hart's probably playing 40 plus minutes a night. Where is he on the floor and how do you align your help based on that? Right. Like, I think he basically after the first 2 games, he took the 76ers out of the strategy of literally ignore the guy. Like Kyle Lowry was playing middle of the floor throughout the entire game and just leaving that dude. They came out of that, but nonetheless, obviously you saw in the last shot of the game, right? Maxey stunts at him and goes back to DiVincenzo and Hart's open and he makes the shot. But like that is sound strategy, right? So from a Pacer perspective, I feel like it's understanding, I don't know who the roamer off of Hart, quote unquote, is going to be. Is it Haliburton? Haliburton spent some time on DiVincenzo and some time on Hart. I wonder where they go with that.
Pause for context. DiVincenzo had 37 points against Tyrese Haliburton when Tyrese was DiVincenzo's primary defender.
That's right.
It will most likely be Tyrese playing roamer off of Josh Hart, I think.
Right. So then you use him as much as you can as a helper and a roamer, and that allows everybody else to kind of stay where they need to stay. I think is also part of the calculus when you're trying to shrink the floor on Jalen.
Pick and roll coverages then. By the fourth quarter of the game, after Jalen Brunson had found out he was an all-star and he goes for 40-plus points. The Pacers do end up doing a lot more blitzing and a lot more trapping, as you may have known. Samson, I don't know if you know these numbers. I made a video after this game happened. The New York Knicks had 24 offensive rebounds in this game. When Jalen Brunson was on the floor, their offensive rebounding rate was 45.8%. When he was off the floor, it was 29.4%. And that's not because Jalen Brunson is gobbling up a bunch of rebounds. It's because he was forcing traps to this degree, and then the Pacers are outnumbered. Since they've acquired Pascal, they're not the worst opponent offensive rebounding rate team in the NBA anymore, but they are still 24th. In the fourth quarter, when they went to this trapping, the New York Knicks offensive rebounding rate when Jalen was on the floor was 71.4%. They grabbed 10 offensive rebounds against this. So this is the conundrum they find themselves in. It's going to be a tall order for Andrew to be guarding Jalen Brunson and lock and trail over the top with Miles and drop. But if they trap, they're not a good enough rebounding team, I don't feel, to be able to hang in these types of situations, because that's what you're going to see. It wasn't even solely that they got outnumbered. They also just got out-physicaled by Hartenstein and Precious Achiuwa in that fourth quarter, giving up a lot of second chances. And those situations, obviously, Precious had a really strong game against them. Here they are doubling from the top. Like I mentioned, that's usually where they're going to go. They get put in a rotation. Ben falls. They both rotate to the wrong spot, and that leaves Precious and Josh Hart available to crash and then get that easy putback. So where do you fall on the balance, both of you, between blitzing and what the gravitational waves of that can be with respect to this Pacer team, or Benjy, more generally, what you've seen across the league this year?
Man, I mean, they rebounded 50% of their misses against the Sixers in the fourth quarter, all series. Like, it's amazing. And the Sixers didn't trap.
The Nick Nurse really held off on that for the most part.
He did not trap. I mean, really, very rarely. I mean, maybe twice a game throughout the series he trapped. So, obviously the trapping does make it more difficult. The Knicks, I mean, this is what they freaking do. And it is, they wear you down too. So, like, I think what happened to the Sixers is, like, they held their grounds on rebounding the ball for three quarters for the most part. And then fourth quarters, like, they just could not maintain that consistency in boxing and bodying, and it's hard to do. And the Knicks are freaking relentless. And I don't, I wouldn't, if I'm the Pacers, that alignment you just showed is insane. Like, you're putting two at half court. Like, that is like JV stuff. Like, I don't know any, like, I don't even know anyone who's worth that coverage. I don't think Luka's worth that coverage. I think you're just asking yourself to be broken down. But in terms of, and that's too far one way, obviously. I think they are going to have to play some of this series in a over-the-top drop kind of coverage. I think that's going to be a large portion of it. I think what you do is you dig off and you help off of Hart at the nail. If he's one pass away, even if he's two passes away, you can clog and have your nail defender cover the corner if he has to. But you have to mix in traps both to kind of get Brunson off balance, and if Brunson's doing what he's doing and he's on a run, then maybe you have to throw it in there, but it can't be all the way out there, because then you're dooming yourself to both breakdowns and then the offensive rebounds, to your point.
I agree there too. And also not that I'm like a big stats guy, but if you're giving up that percentage of offensive rebounds, just statistically funneling like Brunson to kind of like into boogie woogie territory where he kind of does his thing, it might be demoralizing in some sense, because you're like, damn, this guy keeps getting his shot off, or he keeps like bringing help maybe with like 9 seconds left on the clock and they get a good look. But that level of offensive rebounding, if you let it go wild, it can like capsize you. I think it's better to try and play contain where you can. And it's, in my mind, it's always a decent idea to let players prove to you that they're a supernova before you react as if they are. And while Jalen has been doing that for quite a few games in a row, I think I would still let the clock go from zero against the Pacers.
And to be fair, that's what the Pacers did in that game. They didn't advance to that until the fourth quarter, and that's when they got absolutely crushed on the offensive glass. By the numbers on Second Spectrum, the best coverage against Brunson is blitz. 0.973 points per chance this year when you do blitz Brunson. So I think that we both commiserated on it a little bit. Was the best team that guarded Brunson this year the Los Angeles Lakers with regards to trapping them?
Yes, yeah, but and of course that's their very unique ability on the back line to just recover out of everything. Like that. I mean, I remember that game also. The Knicks have had like 4 different seasons. I know the Raptors had like 13 different seasons, but the Knicks have had like 4 different seasons. And I recall that game again was like with all the injuries, like it was a lot of Precious, Hart, and a center lineups. And so the Lakers are really good at that to begin with in terms of because of all the length they have in AD on the back line, and LeBron can run and roam and do all his stuff. You can trap and recover out. I don't know if the Pacers have that kind of personnel. And then also the spacing was so bad with those lineups in the second game, at least against LA. It's better now, right? So I just don't know the viability from Pacers personnel perspective, and then like the increased spacing the Knicks have, but it will be part of the story, I think, Caitlin, right? Like they will show some blitzes.
Let's talk a little bit more about what you said with regards to some of the spacing and the digs and the off-ball movement, in case that's more what the Pacers lean into. Since they acquired OG and without Randall being out there more, do you find their activity, their off-ball screening to be more active than what it was beforehand? Like, how much harder is it for you to be digging off? Are they going to test those stunts?
Yeah, I think it's funny. They mix up their alignment a lot. Like you'd think they'd want DiVincenzo to be one pass away on that opposite wing of every pick and roll, so that the nail help has to be very hesitant to move. But the Knicks don't do that, and a lot of times they'll put Devo in the corner, and they'll run a 45 cut and then have Devo pop out, right, and like try to open it up that way. They have gotten very good at this year, I think, at exposing those weak side stunts. Certainly better. Sometimes Jalen doesn't get off the ball quick enough. And that kind of negates the advantage that might be created off the ball. But they have gotten good at it. And again, like Josh Hart is very aware of his limitation as a shooter, and like the pin-in screens also are a big part of their offense, right? Hartenstein's excellent at pin-in screens. Josh Hart will cut in and then pin-in screen. Sometimes Josh Hart will pin-in screen and then cut through it. So the guy will be trying to get through. All of a sudden, he's got a layup. So yeah, they've kind of activated that part of their game again. Like it's part of this makeover second half of the year where they were just more movement. Even though it's all Jalen, it's movement heavy. Like it's not. No one's just standing around. Like everyone's trying to create space on the floor. They will punish some of that. Yeah.
The thing that I would say about that is I looked up and checked, and pre-trade, they ranked 21st in off-ball screens per 100 possessions. Post-trade, they're up to 8th.
There you go. Yeah.
But their turnover rate, they're turning the ball over more. So like Sampson knows, he's covered a team that tries to win and reverse engineer the possession war a lot. If the Knicks are turning the ball over more, that helps the Pacers not only with their own transition game, but make up for some of what they might be giving up on the offensive glass. So have you noticed that that's somewhat more of a product of, hey, like we used to be an isolation heavy team. The ball would stick more with Randall. It would stick more with Brunson. Now, if you're incorporating more movement against Brunson, you're incorporating some more of these, it's not just how Brunson's getting from point A to point B. It's what points C, D, and E are doing around him.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. And it's also the ball's in Hartenstein's hands more, facilitating from the elbows, and he can be, although he's an excellent passer and very good as a hub, he is turnover prone in that spot. So they've that's been, as opposed to like Randall ISOs, Brunson ISOs, like that's become a facet of their offense. Josh Hart having the ball more, again, a good passer, like a good player downhill 4-on-3, somewhat turnover prone. He plays 40 minutes a night now, and he has the ball a ton. DiVincenzo even. Last year with Golden State, he was even worse because that's what Golden State people do, is they turn the ball over. But also, like with the ball more, a bit turnover prone, as opposed to just kind of sticking with Randall and Brunson. Brunson always excellent at taking care of the ball. Randall, some of the time, really good at taking care of the ball. Other times you can fluster him. But just the ball kind of sticking with one guy, I think, does limit the turnovers. And now it's changed. And I think that will be an interesting battleground. Can the Pacers turn them over and then turbocharge that transition game, which is devastating?
Sampson, thoughts on the possession war battle here and what that pertains to with more off-ball movement versus what you might give up with turnovers?
The Knicks have gotten so cool and so good that it feels almost, terrible to compare them to the Raptors, despite having some a similar ethos and approach. I do not have a ton of confidence in the Pacers defense to turn it up and turn the Knicks over.
Sure.
At the drop of a hat. Now they might have a couple games, that might be it, but that's probably not something I'm planning for exactly. I'd have to see that before I start saying okay, this is something for the Knicks to worry about. Even as Benjy said, there are turnover prone players and they play a little bit more of a turnover prone style. I'd have to see it from the Pacers to start that defensive playmaking up. Like, obviously, we'll see it from Nembhard. We'll see some from like TJ, but I got to see it from the back line a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, in the reverse situation, something that Tyrese has talked about, that it becomes very hard when you turn the Pacers over because they are moving at such a fast rate in the up-tempo court that for them to have to stop and then turn back against a live ball turnover, not that they're a good defensive team to begin with, but that puts even more pressure on their defense. But something that I do want to build off of before we leave the Jalen Brunson conversation is, in guarding him, is the best way to guard him almost what you're doing against him offensively? And how much is that? What are you noticing in terms of teams attacking him? How is he holding up when he gets targeted? What is the best way to target him, given the upgrades that the Knicks have made defensively, not only just, acquiring OG, but what that overall defensive unit is?
Yeah. I thought, look, you're going to get your like standard kind of too high, like bring whoever Brunson's guarding into the Tyrese Haliburton action and see how the Knicks react. I think the Knicks this year, at least, and I've only gotten to watch about a game and a half since we knew what the series was. Brunson would switch occasionally onto Tyrese, mostly show and recover, kind of depending on context and maybe how many guys are on his side of the floor. But he, that stuff, look, you'll get some stuff out of that. Like it's hard for any team to guard that kind of thing. And they don't want Brunson, I don't think, switching onto Tyrese consistently. Show and recover has its own downsides. You're going to open up some cracks. And then I thought the Sixers had the most success actually when they put Brunson and he was guarding Lowry during these games. They put him in a stagger screen as the first screener before the big, and the Knicks could not freaking figure out how to guard that thing. This is how the Sixers basically took off in the third quarter of game 3, the game that they won. The Knicks can at times struggle communicating those types of complicated actions. And the one thing I do worry about, I think maybe my biggest fear about on the defensive side of the ball is how the Pacers are maybe the best team in terms of like flying into their actions and forcing you to communicate several different ways on a single possession. And the Knicks can get lost on some of that stuff. And if you involve Brunson so that there's more to think about in terms of like, can we switch this? Do we have to stay? I think you can get some open looks off of that. So, and I know the Pacers do run that stagger action a lot, right? And I think you'll see whoever he's guarding, if it's probably Nembhard to start, as the first screener in that type of action to try to confuse things.
If it is Nembhard, one of their favorite actions that they like to run for Nembhard that you'll see when Pascal brings the ball up the court is Nembhard will come off a stagger with Tyrese as the first screener. When Nembhard catches that pass from Pascal above the break, Tyrese flips around and will go set a ghost screen for Nembhard, and then you're putting that player through that many, you have to come off the stagger, you have to defend the ghost. If you don't switch it can become complicated. But that is something I wanted to ask both of you. Do you think that Brunson will guard Nembhard, or do you think he'll guard Nesmith?
I think Nembhard is in for another really great series. Yeah, obviously that was how it worked out against Dame, and Dame wasn't present every single game, but Nemby had an opportunity to show out on the defensive end and found a bunch of space because of how defenses tilt towards Tyrese and Pascal, that there's room for him to be a shot maker, not only as a catch and shoot guy, but as a creator. I think that there will probably be room for that. And I think if I had to guess, it'll be Brunson there.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's how the Knicks will start. They did move Brunson around the floor against the Sixers, so I don't, they won't necessarily stay one way, but I think he'll start on Nembhard. I think Nesmith obviously just provides Nembhard's a physical player too. It's kind of funny. I started to say that, then I kind of stopped myself. But Nesmith's just a little bigger. I think he could potentially hurt you on the offensive glass. That's a place the teams have really hurt Brunson, because he is a very good helper and he'll get in and try to draw charges, but that opens up his backside for offensive rebounds a lot. So Nesmith could be flying in there and hurting him. And then also just shooting over Brunson contests. Like Nesmith can just basically just spot and shoot over it. Nembhard, I don't think, is quite as willing a shooter, and also just a little smaller. That's why I think they'll start.
But sometimes he shoots 23-foot threes as 26-foot threes, which will give him a little bit more extra space.
There you go.
Will you both allow me a mini rant if we return to the film room about this topic?
Sure.
Please.
Okay, here we go. So in the fourth quarter of that game, you might recall that this was when I should have known that Buddy Hield would no longer be on this roster anymore. Because they're in the fourth quarter of a tie game. Precious Achiuwa is guarding Pascal Siakam. Jalen Brunson is guarding Buddy Hield in the corner. And instead of being like, hey, let's run the offense through Pascal Siakam as the ball handler, use Buddy Hield as the screener, perhaps Pascal can then back down Jalen Brunson, they kept having Pascal Siakam screen for Andrew Nembhard and then letting Precious Achiuwa either switch or there Andrew Nembhard ends up turning the ball over, dribbling off the pick against Deuce McBride. And this is why I asked, what is the best way to target Jalen Brunson? Because they virtually did not put Brunson into many actions as the screener. As you said, there was only a few times that he ended up on the ball against Tyrese, and even one of them, they're like, oh, let's get Brunson off the ball and let's go screen Bogey into the action instead, which I realize is not a terrible strategy to get Bojan Bogdanovic on the ball, but you see. So then another one, here is Jalen Brunson guarding Nembhard in the corner. Pascal gets that switch against Dante DiVincenzo, and what the Pacers really like to do when they're running some of those corner actions is you can see they're pairing it with Nesmith setting that flare screen for Nembhard to lift up from the corner. Mm-hmm. That's targeting Brunson by, hey, which thing am I going to do? Am I going to go over there and help on the backside of this post up / bully drive action from Pascal, or am I going to lift up with Andrew Nembhard? I don't know how much he's really going to do against Pascal turning the corner out of a post up, but like, do you see him as somebody that like earlier in the season, the Pacers did not run a lot of action at Kyrie Irving. They purposely put him in the weak side corner of pick and roll actions to target him as a tagger. Would you rather target Jalen Brunson as a tagger, as a help defender, or would you rather it's like, hey, let's let Tyrese cook against him in space, or let's just let Nembhard run some offense with Jalen Brunson as the on-ball defender like they did against Dame in the prior series?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think it's all of it. I think you mix all of it in and you test him in all those different ways. It's like, I think in certain matchups, I think even against Philly, Brunson's wasn't such a weak point as a weak side helper because he can meet Tyrese at the spot, right? Like Maxi's driving around that corner and like most of the time he's just going to go up and Brunson can meet him there and be a helper. Tyrese Haliburton, we're talking about different Tyrese's. Haliburton, different story because, man, I don't think anybody in the league maybe Luka tests the weak side helper the way and manipulates the weak side helper the way Tyrese Haliburton does. If I'm the Pacers, that's something I absolutely try to do is try to freeze him in that spot and see if you can hit that weak side corner a bunch or freeze him and get to the rim or hit the roller. If Brunson's not willing to get all the way, right? You freeze it. You basically just freeze him in space and you can pick off different options. That's what Tyrese Haliburton does. So I think it's a little bit of all of it. I think the Knicks, I think if you do the same thing, the Knicks will get comfortable. I think sometimes actually Philly spam the same stuff too many times in a row to a point where the Knicks were able to kind of adjust and get comfortable into the game. So I think the Pacers, again, this is a strength of theirs. They're what's the word I'm looking for? There's a lot of variety in their offense and they'll go action to action faster than anybody. And I think that's going to be difficult for Brunson to navigate.
I think just to add to is that it depends if you were looking for the points per possession or the full court approach to Brunson is hey, we want to affect his offense by putting him through the ringer on defense. And some of that weak side stuff might bear out that there's higher points per chance or something like that. But you also might want to guarantee that he has to go through a certain amount of stuff at the point of attack so that maybe he doesn't have 46 more minutes of 40-point scoring in him on the other end. But these are just considerations. I'm more than anything, I'm just excited to see how it starts to play out because that's the real meat of it.
In the reverse of that, I can tell you that the New York Knicks put Tyrese into action on 24 picks, 14 per 100 possessions. The entire series that we just watched the Indiana Pacers play against the Milwaukee Bucks, he defended through 18 picks. So the Knicks did that in 3 regular season games. So I expect that there's going to be a lot of targeting of Tyrese Haliburton in an attempt to slow him down, not only because of what the Knicks offense is, but because of what the pace for the Pacers is. And that isn't something that the Knicks want to do. So
yeah, the Knicks are hunters. They've been doing that, especially in both playoff runs we've seen. Is they will slow the thing down to a crawl and they will find your weak point and they will test it. And Tyrese Maxey, to his credit, the Knicks tried that for 2 games and Maxey was up to the task in a way that I never ever expected. And they know what they did. They're like, all right, so let's screw no more Maxey. How about you, Tobias Harris? And then that's where Brunson started finding traction, is in the Tobias Harris matchup. So they will hunt Tyrese and they will ask him to prove himself as a defender, whatever he's doing. I don't think they're going to switch much, but if they do, Brunson's going to go at him.
Tyrese has shown on way more picks post-trade deadline than he was beforehand. So some of what you would have seen from the Pacers between the Knicks, that will be different. And if you're running Josh Hart and he's going to be the guard-to-guard screener to try to get Tyrese switched onto the ball, because I do expect that Tyrese will guard Hart something that I think has been a creative wrinkle that the Pacers have found is they do low man pick and roll peel switching. So like if Tyrese is being targeted, he'll jump up to show. If Josh slips that going back to the rim, then it would be like, I'm Miles Turner. I'm the low man. I take Josh Hart. Tyrese will go to the 45 and peel off, and the 45 defender will take the corner defender. That way, Tyrese isn't getting hunted, and you're still being able to use him, which is more his strength, putting his arms in passing lanes and recovering from there. Now, he can lose his recovery path a little bit. Sometimes he needs a little bit of a map, depending upon how you leak out of those screens. But it is something that the Pacers have found that's allowed him not to get targeted quite as much in the same way, at least. But showing you those two clips and the fact that they didn't, involve Buddy to get Jalen Brunson involved, but they did involve Precious Achiuwa. Samson, Benjy, could this be a Precious Achiuwa series? Do you expect that we might see Precious minutes? He did have a double-double against the Pacers. One reason I think that it could be is because the Knicks ranked 29th in switch frequency. Switching is the more effective coverage against the Pacers, and he's the most switchable big on the roster. But you guys have seen way more of him than I have, so you have the floor.
He's actually the most switchable big in the NBA, quite frankly.
Oh, baby, let's go.
No, it's probably Bam, but Precious is really fantastic. I wonder in this series because I've been thinking a lot about like where does OG go defensively is a huge
We will
question.
get to that. Don't touch on that.
Okay, I won't.
We're just talking about Precious Achiuwa.
Okay, Precious was not only like effective over the course of the whole game against the Pacers when they played, but he was particularly good on allowing the Knicks to stay at home on Pascal. And Pascal got close on a lot of possessions against Precious, but Precious sliding with him, not allowing him, like making some of those drives, curved drives, and those contests at the rim after taking bumps. He was really, really good in a pinch. And he still embodies that kind of that Knicks ethos of like bring the rain on the offensive end as far as like offensive rebounding. At the top of the podcast talking about like, hey, he set 3 screens and was like making reads of the floor to service Jalen's game. All that kind of stuff can all be happening. And he's in a unique position, not just for Pascal, but for a wide array of what the Pacers like to do. There's a lot of defensive utility from Precious Achiuwa as far as I can see it.
Will Tibbs play Precious Achiuwa, Benjy? Is that a thing that'll happen?
It's a loaded question. I would say I think he will get minutes at some point in the series. I don't think it'll be game 1 unless there's foul trouble. I don't think. Now, right now, the Knicks literally have a 7-man rotation. There probably will be an 8th man in game 1. I think it might be Alec Burks. If I had a guess, even though the guy hasn't seen the floor in a month or so, I think they're going to try to see if he can have an impact on the series.
See if he can match up with the offensive force that is TJ McConnell. That's
exactly right. I mean, can't match that, but you can only try.
That guy knocked down 2 threes last night, Benjy. Respect here.
And he made some unbelievable. I mean, he's awesome. TJ McConnell's awesome. I am a huge fan of that guy, and like I'm actually terrified of him in this series. Random. I don't know, because if you remember, Deuce McBride guarded him, and I think he had 6 straight buckets on Deuce McBride in the last.
And if you'll remember, though, Deuce McBride went on a personal 11-0 run against the Pacers the other way.
Listen, Deuce is a good defender, man. He's pretty tough, but like TJ took him, just went at him. Sorry, what was I talking about? Precious. I don't think unless there's foul trouble, he'll play game 1. But there will be a point in the series like there was against the Sixers, and boy, did he make an impact when he got in there, where they'll need to switch. They're down in a game. They feel like they have to switch something up. Where he will make an impact. My guess is at the 5. Now the Pacers are interesting, right? Because you can always cross match the 5 and the 4, which I know the Bucks tried at the beginning and didn't at the end. So like if Precious plays the 5, he could still guard Pascal. You could put someone else on Miles. But I do think he'll have something to say in this series. I just don't think it'll be game 1 unless there's foul trouble.
Hey, you know what? The Bucks put Brook Lopez on Aaron Nesmith, and it worked for a half. And then when it was an elimination in game 6, they did it for like 5 total possessions and decided, hey, that thing that we found that kind of worked, let's not do that a bunch anymore. But
I'll pat myself on the back. That was our in-between game pod. I was like, nah, the fix for this is Aaron has to play better. And he did.
He did play better, and he did make a shot as a ghost screener once, but the rest of the time they didn't really have Brooke guarding him anymore. So I don't really know why they didn't go to that. But self-indulgently, I am in it for the Precious minutes because if Precious plays, it's possible that we might get another possession of this, which, as you all know, you both know, jump passes are good now. Self-alley-oop jump passes that draw Precious Achiuwa to the ball in semi-transition are amazing now. So more of that.
That was wild.
Was that the coolest pass you've ever seen in live action?
It was bonkers. I was very angry about it.
When last game, it just came off the rim first.
Yes. Yeah.
Funny thing is Brunson constantly plays off of 2 feet, and Tyrese never wants to play off of either of his feet. Aerial exploits versus ground and pound here.
The contrast is honestly beautiful between the two. They're like, I don't know. I can't think of more opposite point guards who are superstars in their own ways and do different ways. I mean, like, it's pretty cool just how different basketball players can be and still be great. But, you know, and I know we're going to maybe touch on OG later, but you don't want Pascal to be a pressure point as a one-on-one scorer. And to Sampson's point, Precious allows for that, where you don't have to really help or double. You can kind of live with whatever. The thing is, when you have OG now, you can probably stick OG on Pascal and have the same result, where that's not really a pressure point. Not that Pascal can't score on him, but just that you're not going to necessarily compromise your defense for that one-on-one matchup. And so, like, maybe that actually limits Precious's impact a little bit because you have another guy, another Raptor, who can kind of take Pascal one-on-one and let everyone else chill.
I'm excited to hear your matchup data that you pulled for OG and Pascal.
I didn't have time to pull it. Listen, what did you say? You saw 35 seconds of practice time with that matchup?
Hell yeah.
Yeah. They know each other, that's for sure.
I've decided it's time to pivot the conversation to OG since we're already there anyways. That was what we had next, because we'll pivot the conversation to guarding Tyrese Haliburton and to OG's presence, because the Pacers did not play the New York Knicks with OG Anunoby in the lineup this year. A lot of what we have to go off from the actual games here isn't that telling. The Pacers played the zombie Knicks after the trade when OG got sent to New York. They didn't play him then. Tyrese was on a minutes restriction in one of these games. He didn't even play in the fourth quarter. He was limited in the games that he played in. So not super telling, the actual film footage that we have to go off of. But
you missed that the third game, Taj Gibson was starting at center for the New York Knicks.
I mean, in some of these games, Evan Fournier was running around and doing a lot of things here.
It was Taj Gibson and Precious Achiuwa starting front line, which might have been my favorite thing of the year.
Tremendous. But OG actually was Tyrese's primary assignment in the game that Sampson and I covered the day before American Thanksgiving. That's who Darko used against Tyrese. Last year, Nick Nurse did not put OG on Tyrese. Typically, OG would guard Buddy Hield, but that was for Fred VanVleet reasons. So I'm going to ask Sampson right off the top, what did you think in that game? Obviously, it was a very long time ago. Different context defensively for the Raptors, but just of OG guarding Tyrese.
Good. Like, you're kind of cheating when you start out with OG guarding somebody. But if you want to talk about like aerial exploits and like big gaps and stuff like that, for the same reason, even though, you know, Tyrese and Jalen are very different, OG's inherent lack of gambles and inherent overabundance of contain with his on-ball stuff is really quite good for sticking with Tyrese. And especially since that was like in the midst of Tyrese, this big start to the season, this wasn't even, you know, a little bit less aggressive version of Tyrese that we've seen over the past however long. OG has always had a pretty great sense of putting guys into weaker spots in their shot diet, being able to suppress shot volume, and being able to do it without compromising the rest of the defense. And I thought he did so against Tyrese. And I think that's what I would lead with if I were the Knicks.
You'd start there. Oh, you would. And then with hard on Siakam?
I might try and do the big, yeah. See how that goes, but yeah.
Man. Yeah, I mean, it's such a.
So you'd put Mitchell, or you'd put Hartenstein on Siakam, is what you're saying. Like what the Bucks just did.
I might try and keep it weird. Yeah.
It's so fascinating coming off of last series, because this was, I mean, it's always going to be a question. The great thing about OG is it's a weaponization question. It's not like a problem. It's like, where can you have the most impact? And I said from the beginning, I thought he should have been guarding Harris, Oubre, you know, decent offensive wings, because I thought Maxi's so damn fast. It's almost, you're not staying attached anyway. And like, at that point, I'd rather him be on the backside, like contesting at the rim off of like so-so shooters. Mm-hmm. And first 2 games they had him on Maxi. They won both games, so it's hard to say it went badly, and they guarded pretty well. I thought he had by far his most offensive impact once they switched him off and allowed him to roam a little bit on the back line and just like freaking muck things up the way he uniquely can. Just affords you this crazy thing also, because especially with Miles Turner out there, if the center's on Miles Turner, and you lose that the Knicks are so freaking dedicated to rim protection. With Miles Turner, it's harder for the center to be there if he's guarding him. Well, now you have, again, the beauty of OG Anunoby is like you have a rim protector just playing the 4. And it's OG Anunoby who's still there if he's guarding whoever.
Can I hop in there really quick and just say that we do know from the past of even when it was Turner and Sabonis, there was matchups where Tibbs would still put the center on Miles instead of Sabonis, in part because Sabonis and Julius Randle were like American gladiators going to war with one another. But also, he was definitely willing to live with Nerlens Noel, Mitchell Robinson on Miles, and maybe we get more than we bargained for. And there were games where they did, where Miles hit 7 threes, like what we just saw him do 2 games ago against the Bucks. But that does seem like that was what Tibbs was like. That's what I'm willing and accepting to live with.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so this is a different matchup though. And I think, first of all, in the sense that Tyrese just isn't freaking as fast as Maxi. Like OG can, I think, contain to a better extent on Haliburton than he would on Maxi. But also like you have this Siakam thing where again, you can eliminate a pressure point. And I think anyone else who's guarding Pascal, is at Hartenstein, it'll be from a speed perspective. Like if Pascal's catching on the move and like kind of pivoting him, I just don't know if iHeart can stay with him. And then once he gets that angle, he draws all the fouls and he does his Pascal things. And then if you put Josh Hart on him, certainly it would be Josh Hart if it's not OG or iHeart. I think you have to help down low. Like, I don't know if Josh is 6'4", for God's sake. We forget it because he rebounds like 75% of the Knicks misses, but he's 6'4". So like asking him to guard Pascal one-on-one, you're going to have to compromise your defense. So I think to start, I lean on Siakam and try to just take that away and see how we navigate the whole Tyrese game with probably DiVincenzo on Haliburton, maybe Josh Hart. Maybe both, maybe some combination of the two. I do think OG will see time on Haliburton. There's no question in my mind about that. They will move him around the floor. I think certainly when they're staggering, and if OG's ever on the floor when Pascal's out and Haliburton's in, he'll guard Haliburton. Like they'll shift him right away. I just think it's, to start, I would probably have him on Siakam.
How did you feel about the Knicks double teams against Embiid when Tyrese Maxey was the post entry passer? Because one of the games I was pretty underwhelmed, especially with OG having to rotate over. He was late a couple times. There was a few times where he sunk on the cutter. Like you can't be taking the cutter when Tyrese Maxey's the one where you have to keep those rotations in front. And that's typically what I prefer. I understand why the Pacers do it because Embiid has grown, in my opinion, the last 2 years of being able to throw a single pass, a dart over the top to the opposite corner. That's one pass. If you're rotating in the opposite direction, it might be, 2 or 3 passes to get it to Batum. But overall, if it were to the point where they do what Samson said, it's Josh Hart against Pascal Siakam, Tyrese Haliburton is the post entry pass. Maybe you're having Tyrese screen away to try to take that. How do you feel about the Knicks double teaming in that situation based on what you just saw?
Yeah, I mean, that was, I think, most fascinating chess match of the last 2 games of the series. And I thought the Knicks gave Maxey 9 free points, just not closing out to him after that first rotation, which was crazy. Right. They just didn't fix it. And yeah, the Sixers were sending that little cut to the foul line to try to distract OG, and OG fell for it a couple times and like sunk onto Tobias Harris at the foul line instead of dealing with the rotation. Then what happened was the Knicks were like, all right, we're not going to rotate from one pass away. We're going to send OG from the weak side to double, and we're going to leave DiVincenzo on Maxey, and we're going to force Embiid to throw the ball across court. And the problem with that is that Nick Nurse was like, okay, fine, I'll insert Buddy Hield, and I'll stick him in the weak side corner, and you can't cover 2 guys with Buddy Hield in the corner, and Buddy Hield got 2 threes out of that. So they tried different things. Then in the fourth quarter,
you're telling me that Buddy was impactful in a playoff game?
Dude, Buddy was, I was so mad. Buddy was a beast last night, man. It was crazy. It was great by Nick Nurse. It was a great, he was out of the series, then he's back in and he makes whatever 5 or 6 threes. but I think he was specifically targeting that kind of weak side double that the Knicks were sending. Even though it was from the middle, they were sending OG. It was kind of interesting. Then they didn't double a couple times, and Embiid literally just walked Hartenstein to the rim and made 2 jump hooks. And then on like late post up in the fourth quarter, for the first time all series, I'm pretty sure, OG came from the baseline. Hartenstein forced him baseline. Embiid never saw it coming, threw up a crappy shot trying to draw a foul, and it was a huge stop. So that was a really interesting chess match throughout that game. If it's Pascal on Josh Hart and it's Tyrese Haliburton 1 pass away, man, it's kind of the same dilemma. I think they'll try a bunch of different things. I think one thing I really like about the Knicks coming off of the Sixers series is there's, even though the teams are very, very different, there's a 5-out-edness of both teams where the bigs are out and you got to cover pick and pop bigs, and the Knicks were able to kind of cycle through a bunch of coverages. I think that'll be really helpful. Again, the personnel is very different, but I think it'll be very helpful going into this series. And I think they'll try a little bit of all of it. And I think if they do decide to double off of that first pass, they better be more disciplined in terms of getting out to Tyrese Haliburton and don't let him get going from three.
Let me tell you that I think since Tyrese came over, the best 3 primary defenders that I've seen guard Tyrese is Jalen Suggs, Jaden McDaniels, and Quentin Grimes.
You're going to say that. Yeah. It hurts.
That
hurts.
And it kind of does, not only because Bogey's hurt, but like honestly, like that in the, shall we call it, the Wally Zerbiak game a year ago.
Shall we?
Shall we? I think we should. Yeah, so part of the reason why that game ended up going the way that it was is because Tyrese eventually went away from the drop coverage with Mitchell Robinson because Quentin Grimes was beating him to his spot even when he was rejecting those screens. So he was like, all right, I'm just going to try to isolate against Julius Randle, which ended up going poorly on that final shot against the wing, which that is a shot that Tyrese can make. But you see the point. Like, they don't have another point of attack defender like Quentin Grimes. Like Dante DiVincenzo can kind of nip at the heels. He can apply some full court pressure. Like if it is an OG, I'm assuming it's going to be DiVincenzo. Would it not be? Like, I mean, I think that's...
I would think my only thought in a possible different approach is, and the Knicks cycled through Josh Hart, OG, and DiVincenzo on Maxey in the last series. All 3 guys got time on him, and Deuce when Deuce was in. Pretty much was by default on him, but in the starting lineup, all 3 guys started on him in different games. But my thought with Josh Hart is only that you can then switch the Pascal Haliburton actions. That's if it's true. Josh Hart. If it's DiVincenzo, you really can't, because Pascal will just back him into the rim. And you can try to obviously scram switch and do whatever you need to do to try to get out of that, but that's a consideration. I think DiVincenzo probably starts on him, especially the way he ended guarding Maxey very well in game 6. But I think you'll probably see Josh Hart on him as well.
Yeah, those 3 defenders, because Grimes is able to plug the rejection and still be able to get up over the top of the screen when you set up a screen. Jalen Suggs, because he can apply full court pressure and he's very physical in preventing Tyrese from being able to be a screener and free himself. And then Jaden McDaniels, because Jaden can mix in unders and surge out. And because if you do reject it, Jaden still has the length to recover at the rim. In the case of OG, I watched back those minutes from the game against the Raptors. And as much as I love OG as a defender, I don't know, Samson, how often is OG picking somebody up full court? Because he wasn't doing it in that game. But that could be a change from Nick Nurse to Darko as well.
You could see it in big games. But it wasn't like that was more so something that Scotty would do, just because I think it's not, players affect how coaches use them based on what they voice and what they like. And OG is more so like they're not doing anything before half court. So, and
there were times where OG was like a weighted blanket in that game. But like, I think that really in a playoff series, you really are going to have to be able to pressure Tyrese, space guard Tyrese. And I don't know if that's where the Knicks are going to want to start with OG, though I do kind of agree with Benjy that it could end up getting mixed in during staggered lineups. But I felt that the most productive minutes when OG was guarding Tyrese in that game were the start of the fourth quarter when Scotty was in at the 5 and they were switching. So like OG switching on to Miles, Scotty then switching on to the ball. When they could switch the Spain actions, it looked a lot better than what they were doing in the first half. And some of that was for Jakob Poeltl reasons, because quite honestly, that was not a game for Jakob Poeltl that day. And he was defending at a very odd drop depth, I felt, throughout, especially the first half of that game. But this possession against OG, So this was late in the fourth quarter where I found like this to be a very strange decision from Tyrese, where there's 24 seconds to play. Scottie had made that keeper. The Raptors are up 2. And instead of like trying to get a screen to get Gary Trent involved or get literally anyone else involved, he decides just to go without a screen against OG to his weaker left hand, which OG forces him towards. Tyrese isn't going to finish with his left, so he tries to get to that runner with his right. Kind of falls down. I think he thought he got fouled. I don't think there was contact there, but those types of possessions, certainly, like I said, there's times where OG can be a weighted blanket against him. So I think that's kind of one of the more fascinating elements of this series is where they're going to put him, be it Siakam or Tyrese. And obviously we have no sample size of either thing because OG's not guarding his own teammate, and the Pacers haven't played the Knicks with OG on the roster. So,
what can I ask just like a philosophical question?
Mm-hmm.
We've discussed feeling apprehensive about how the Knicks guard some doubles. How, do you feel better about the Pacers being able to run a larger semblance of their regular offense at pace and feeling able to suppress that? Or are you more worried about possessions filtering to Siakam against less than advantageous, I guess, defenders?
Based on what the Pacers quote unquote system is and how I know that they prefer to run offense, it would be more bothersome to them if Tyrese gets removed than Pascal does, because they're not going to tilt a lot of offense to post up actions anyways. Like, I can count on one hand the amount of like actual set plays that they have to, here's how we're going to get Siakam the ball in an advantageous situation with optimized spacing around him. Yeah.
So who do you think is the player best suited to remove the Pacers from that offense that they want to be occupying?
I think it's space guarding Tyrese and applying full court pressure. So it's whoever Benjy tells me is going to be best at doing that.
It's Deuce McBride. It's Deuce McBride, but I think it'll be DiVincenzo in the starting lineup. But these guys are all playing 42 minutes a night, so it's hard to even ask them to apply full court pressure. So I don't know if there's a good answer except for Deuce McBride.
And ultimately, whichever pick and roll combination is going to be best at switching out against Tyrese.
Mm-hmm. You know, the other advantage too, and I don't know how, I haven't checked recently how well Siakam has shot the three with Indiana. You could tell me that, I'm sure, but like, he's going to be the weaker or weakest shooter on the floor for Indiana. And if you have OG there, again, it allows him, you got to be careful with Siakam because he's a really good cutter and he can slip into space if you're roaming too much, but it allows him to be a bit more of a helper too. And if he's on Haliburton, you're pretty much trying to deny him the ball once he gives it up. Like, he's out of the play once Haliburton gets off it. So,
despite what Nesmith is as a shooter, Nesmith led the NBA in 3-point percentage for a decent portion of the season. I honestly like roaming off of him better than roaming off of Pascal, because Nesmith isn't going to create for you in space. He's not the best screener. You're not going to use him as a DHO hub. He's not going to turn the ball downhill out of a keeper. Like, those other things are options that you might get to with Pascal, whereas with Nesmith, you are just more reliant on, like, hey, make shots. I think that there's some other systematic things that you could do to move that roamer around, and the Pacers tried a couple of them last night. I don't think it's always like, hey, just stand in the corner and make shots. I think that there's other things that you can do there, but if I was going to roam off of somebody, I'd rather take my chances on Nesmith making just like stationary catch and shoot threes than I would on what Pascal did to Brook Lopez in the first 2 games of that series. Because quite frankly, like, we can look at how Pascal's numbers dipped throughout that series, but what he did in games 1 and 2 is what made the pick and roll more conducive for Tyrese and Miles through the middle portion. And what Tyrese and Miles did is what ended up making the door open for the role players in game 6. But
yeah, when we think about Pascal, trying to weaponize him on the floor is he's a very unique player, and trying to make it work against a team that should have a good defender against him in OG, or should be able to try and like lean on some of his weaknesses by cross matching. It was cool to see him overcome that with, against the Bucks. And it is cool to see him overcome it in space and against certain teams. But I really wonder how that looks against the Knicks, especially with whoever his check ends up being. I wonder how much of the 3-point shot becomes a linchpin for future success, because, some teams, it depends on how resilient you are when you do that. It depends on if you're able to put Pascal in situations where it's a no-brainer. The 3-point shot has to be the shot you're taking. Or if it's kind of this in-between where there's still time on the clock, where you still can get to secondary actions and you can use him as a hub who can create with a live dribble. Like all that kind of stuff kind of sits in the balance of how the Pacers try to approach it, and also how the Knicks try and like make the flaws of his game come to the forefront.
Well, I had one question left that was going to be very Benjy specific, but appears as though his internet has prevented him from staying on. So I guess I'll ask it to you. Maybe you can answer it from a Raptors perspective. Does watching a Pacers-Knicks playoff series bring any extra intrigue to this for you, given what the Pacers-Knicks history is and what the most recent series was in 2013?
I think it's awesome. It takes me back to the halcyon days of the rule of verticality. Like, what a crazy era in basketball. And I remember Paul George is like a top 3 player that I've ever enjoyed. I think he's the most aesthetically pleasing basketball player at his size. And like, it's probably Kyrie, but Paul George is a maelstrom of smoothness. Like, he's just everything and more. And watching those Pacers versus the Knicks, really fun games. It is like, there's a reason you laughed when I brought up the rule of verticality. It's hilarious to think about that era of basketball. But also there's a bunch of intrigue because like I talked to OG and Pascal. I covered these guys for years, and watching those guys go head to head, just from my little small perspective, I'm like, I'm excited for that, man. That's pretty cool. Yeah.
While you were, leaving us in between there, Benjy, I decided to close this out and ask a non-basketball question. Just curious to know, like, do you feel any extra watching a playoff series between the Pacers and Knicks, given the history of these two teams? Is that any more special for you? Kind of like how we always have to say, the league is better when the Knicks are in the playoffs. Are the playoffs better when the Knicks and the Pacers are playing?
You don't have to say it. You don't have to say it. You don't have to say it. We have to say it. Man, I have to say, like, I'm just a little young. Like, I was born in 92. I missed, like, the 90s things where I was really a kid. And, like, the Hibbert series, like, was fun and, like, kind of interesting, but wasn't, like, a crazy rivalry. So I can't say...
This is the wrong answer. I'm going to have to kick you back out of the studio.
You think that series was, like, a rivalry? I guess it was intense.
It was Pacers-Knicks, and Roy Hibbert did make the game-saving block against Carmelo Anthony. I guess I'm probably a little bit biased to it because that was the year before I started writing. So when that series was over, all 5 guys went to the podium together. Like, Paul George wouldn't go do media unless all 5 starters got to go with him. To watch how that era then ended, like a year later, with what was happening the second half of that season and how that team just... the struggle bus that was the Indiana Pacers over the back end, and imagining them all sitting there at the podium together when they, advanced through and barely squeaked past Pero Antic and then the Washington Wizards and then losing 6 to the Miami Heat. Just a very different contrast. Like, I always say that my favorite run was the 2013 Pacer run far more than the team after that one. So I have a lot of fond memories of the Knicks Pacers series from
that Pacer team was so special. I loved that team. I loved watching that team. It was like one of these, it was just a super complimentary team. Like, everybody kind of did their own thing.
It was so cool. That was the era where it seemed like every wing cut their teeth against LeBron in a playoff series. And Paul George was like the most notable, but so did Jimmy Butler. Like, it was really fun, that era that everyone was trying to take down LeBron. We won't talk about the Toronto aspect of it.
And every team wants to hang a banner as like, we played LeBron tougher than any team. Like, that right belongs to us. But yeah, so I mean, I was a little bit young, obviously, too. Like, I don't really have that many memories of watching Reggie in the Knicks series. Clearly, I was like a toddler. But I can tell you that you should go ask Jonathan the next time you hop on about some of his memories from that, because one of them, I think I remember, ruined his birthday party.
Jonathan Macri, like our joint. Oh my God.
Yes, I'm pretty sure that one of them ruined his birthday party.
Him and Claudio. This is like, I mean, Miami last year was probably even worse. Those dudes really, really hate Miami. But Indiana does bring up some demons and brings up some emotion that is different. That's what's fun about it, though. Like, yeah, I can't necessarily like quite plug into it, but like when you have like 30, 40 years of history with the team, like it's pretty cool to get that emotion out of both cities.
I mean, I can tell you that I think our collaborations have been like ping pong diplomacy between the two fan bases, because I think we've softened each other. do this. Like, I have a lot of Knicks fans that follow me just from having collaborated and done stuff with you and you guys. So I had people last night being like, are you going to get back on and do something with Benjy? We need to hear about this.
Oh, that's dope. I love to hear that.
Well, he's going to be coming to my side of it. That's just how we're going to roll this time. But it will be double posted. So if there are Knicks fans listening to this, thanks for hanging out with us. And I don't know, do you guys have anything closing that you want to say about this matchup or anything else that you want to add on here?
Sure. If the Pacers win this, it's an upset for sure. The Knicks are... I had this like under the radar Knicks win it all take. I was letting cook, and then Randall got injured, and then I was like,
"Oh man, you got me nervous there for a second."
Oh yeah, no. I don't think they fully have the juice. Look, Minnesota and Denver are so good. I'm not that big on Boston. I've talked about this with Caitlin. I know some people obviously disagree, but the Knicks are one of my favorite teams to watch. They attacking the margins of basketball and winning them so aggressively. It rules so hard, dude. And also, as somebody who you're only ever really observing New York from the outside, if you're not a New Yorker, there's like an idea of New York. They have a culture, all that kind of stuff. The fact that they have like this gritty ass basketball team that's just like, we go to war every minute. It seems like a match made in heaven. And to see those two things coalesce, and the fact that New York media is so eager to like portray that, it rocks. It's cool to see from the outside.
No, it's fun, man. I mean, I'm sure for you also, like, I felt like the Raptors were like the spin-off series this year for the Knicks. Like they were like a special I could tune into and like hang out with old friends. It was kind of wild. I watched a ton of Raptors basketball, even though they lost every game second half of the year, just to see how our guys were doing over there. Yeah, it is cool, and I'm thrilled. This is the series we get. We almost got it round 1. We get it round 2, which is dope. And like, listen, getting to follow you guys throughout the series will be super fun, just to see the different side of it, the Indiana side of it, and analyzing the series together. We'll continue to do it, I hope, throughout the series. Hopefully it's a pretty long one and a fun one, and it'll be good. People
will know there is a deleted scene of me somewhere from the Ringers YouTube feed where I was asked a question at a coffee shop of what I thought the preferred matchups were for the Pacers, and it was between the Bucks and the Knicks. And I said, well, if the Knicks are fully healthy and the Bucks are fully healthy, I think that the Bucks are an easier matchup for the Pacers than the Knicks. That does not mean that I'm automatically saying that the Pacers are out of this or don't have a chance, but I did have more concerns about a Knicks matchup than I did for a Bucks matchup. And obviously we saw what the Pacers just did in some games without Dame and without Giannis available. So you never fully can tell with this team, but I do concur and say, and the Knicks, I hope they don't take this as a derogatory term, Grime versus Grace in a lot of ways in this series coming at us. So I'm curious to see which one will win out, and very grateful that both of these two guys were willing to sit here and talk with me about it, because I don't know how the series will play out, but this was one of my favorite podcasts that I've recorded now that I've done it in retrospect. So thanks to both of you for the time, and hopefully everybody enjoyed listening to this. Talk to you after game 1.